Shabbat Shalom. Today we observe Solidarity Shabbat, solidarity with our family in Israel, solidarity with those who've lost loved ones, communities that have been destroyed, and for the 200 hostages taken, young and old, who need to be released. We express solidarity with them. They are ever in our hearts and in our minds. I saw a meme this week which came from some leftist university community, a community which I sometimes or almost always agree with. But on this, there was no agreement. The meme, I don't remember it exactly, but it pointed to the idea that the Palestinians have a long connection with the land and that we have no connection or but a modern connection. Now, this was young people living in the United States, and I wanted to say to them, well, what about the Huron, the Iroquois, the Sioux, the Comanche? You know, they have a connection to the land and we don't. Our connection is but a few hundred years old, and we are indeed colonial occupiers of a land. And then I wanted to say to them, well, look at the Torah this week, where Abraham was dwelling in the land. Look at the Haftorah this week, where after we were dispossessed by the Babylonians, we were commanded to go back to the land. And think of the lament of Jews over history, bewailing the loss of our land, bewailing the destruction of Jerusalem, and the desire to go back. And yet, there was a Jewish community in Israel for the last 2,000 years and more continuously, meaning after the various destructions. So really about 2,500 years. And maybe even more, because there's some evidence now that many Jews actually, or Judeans in that time, remained even during the Babylonian exile, because not all the people actually were taken. So there's been a continuous Judean Jewish presence in Eretz Yisrael for at least 3,500 years. And yet we have no connection with the land. It's a tragedy that people don't learn history, or they learn only those pieces of history that serve their needs, forgetting that the world is far more complicated. It's a tragedy we face today from friends and the broader community who don't understand what the Jewish community is going through, who don't understand that we have an intense connection with Israel. Because they, thinking Judaism is like Christianity, well, I'm Christian here in the United States, but I really don't have that much connection with a Christian who might live in India. We're the same religion, yes, but that's about it. They don't understand that Judaism really isn't a religion in that sense. Yes, we are a religion, yes, we have beliefs, but we're so much more. We're a people with a long, long history. I saw another meme where a young boy was looking at Hebrew that was written on stones from the late Second Temple period. Hebrew that we're still reading today, and yet we have no connection with the land. As I was looking at the Torah portion today, looking at God selecting Avram, and Avram going to land he did not know, and actually, to a great extent, at least beginning, living in peace in that land. We do have a war in this week's Parsha, but it was an invasion by the great empires of the East and North, where the people of the land actually joined together to fight to save the land. Avram was part of that, but it was a land where he lived in peace, where he could go and celebrate with the king of Shalem, which most people identify as the king of the city that would become Jerusalem, the city of peace. And that king, Melchizedek, not Jewish, was called a Kohen of God. And interestingly, if you want to look for the first human prayer said in the Torah, you'll find it in this week's Parsha, not said by a Jew, but said by Melchizedek, as he prayed and celebrated with Abraham. I know that I've spoken on this Parsha probably 30 times, 40 times since I became a rabbi and even before. And I focused on aspects of the Parsha that really don't speak to me today, though they're very, very important. And no doubt next year they'll speak to me again. So at the beginning of the Parsha, we find that Avram, goes to Eretz Israel with the souls that he had made. And that, according to our rabbis, are the converts that he made in Haran. It's a very important point, and yet one that doesn't speak to me today. I think of other aspects of Avram that maybe I'll speak about next week. His hospitality, his willingness to challenge God for justice, but also his failures that we see this week as he pretends that Sarai is his sister, not his wife, and his failures with his sons that we'll read next week, which lead ultimately to the exclusion of one and the almost sacrifice of the other. These are very important stories that go to the very center of our tradition. But this week, as I think about messages from our Torah, it doesn't speak to me. This week, the intense connection that Avram had with the land, as it talks about him dwelling there, as it talks about him dealing with the kings of the land, as it talks about him building a family and a community in the land. And next week and the weeks following, the traditions and the ideas of his sons and grandsons living in the land. That speaks to me. It speaks to our Jewish connection with Eretz Yisrael. It speaks to an age-old connection and a longing that our people have felt. And yet, there is a story from this week's Parsha that also speaks to me as I think about what's going on in Israel today. The horrific violence, the hostages, and the sadness that we all feel. And I realized as I was thinking about the story I'm about to share that it actually is a piece of text that I've never talked about in 30 years. Never, ever once. Because it's a little bit of a disturbing text. So in the Torah, disturbing as you'll see in some ways, in the Torah, we know that Lot, Abraham's nephew, went to live in Sodom and Gomorrah, in Sodom, because he didn't want to, Abraham said, we can divide the land, and Lot said, and Lot liked the cities, he liked the comforts, he liked the richness of the valley, which is now the Dead Sea, so not so rich anymore. He liked all of that, and therefore Lot chose to go to Sodom. And Avram said, great, and I will take the other parts of the land for my sheep to dwell in. And then in our Parsha, we have an invasion from kings from outside of Eretz Yisrael. And these kings invade, they despoil Sodom and Gomorrah, and they take Lot captive, bringing him back up towards the east. And Abraham and the other local kings join together, and they actually attack the bigger army which is holding Lot, and they manage to have a victory and to free Lot and to bring him back to the land. And it's there that Abraham goes to Melchizedek, the king of Shalem, and there are offerings made to God and blessings recited as Jews and non-Jewish residents of the land celebrate together their survival. That's an image we could only wish for, but someday may it be so. But I was struck, and I never have talked about that war. I was struck that I've never talked about what Abraham achieved. Abraham achieved the redemption of the hostage, his nephew, bringing him from captivity to freedom. And in our tradition, this is the origin of one of the major mitzvot that was practiced for the last 2,000 years. Now, since then, in the modern times, we've sort of forgotten about it to an extent, not totally, and it's not been high on the list because it's not been, especially in America, our historical reality. But Pidyon Shvuim is the redemption of hostages, the redemption of captives. And Abraham models that behavior just as he models so many other behaviors that are central to what it means for being Jewish. And if we look at communities all through history for the last 2,000 years, since Jews have been in the diaspora, this has been a constant struggle. As Jews have been captured by pirates, as Jews have been arrested by capricious royal authorities, as Jews have been taken hostage in so many different ways, and communities taken hostage in so many different ways. So over the last 2,000 years, this mitzvah was seen as so central that it was part of and what a community was responsible to do. Yes, there were some limitations, but if captives could be redeemed, if hostages could be freed, then that was something that needed to be central in the agenda of the community. There used to be meshulachs, shlichim, who would go throughout the Jewish community collecting money just for the redemption of hostages. And actually, even when I was young, I remember in our community a few people coming by with special collections for that, though I don't know exactly who they wanted to free. I think it was mainly Soviet Jews at that time. So this was a process and something that's so important to us. And this mitzvah speaks out. This mitzvah speaks out as we... If they're speaking out. Okay. This mitzvah speaks out as we think about the 200 captives, the 200 hostages that are being held in Gaza today. And actually, I was thinking about it even in a different way. It speaks out to realize that Hamas isn't only using our 200 hostages as a human shield to make it difficult for Israel to attack and to respond, but actually, to a degree, Hamas is cynically using the entire population of Gaza in the same way as they build their shelters underground while people in Gaza are suffering. I actually saw an article in the New York Times that came this morning where the New York Times was talking about the fact that there are so many tunnels under Gaza and they're stuffed with oil, with food, with medicine, and yet people above them are suffering, and Hamas doesn't care because all they care about is a victory against Israel. All they care about ultimately is destroying Israel. And yet, the world is silent. The world has essentially forgotten the hostages that are held within Gaza, and instead, they look at Israel, vilify Israel, and think that everything Israel does is wrong as Israel tries to protect its villages, as Israel tries to protect its citizens, as Israel tries to free the hostages. The vision in our Torah is so different. The vision in our Torah is a people in a land living together in peace. The vision of our Torah is Avram being an Av Hamon L'Goyim, a father of many nations, a father that people look to, a father that builds bridges of peace. The war that's going on in Israel is horrible. The silence of the world, effectively, about what's going on and the horrors faced by our community is deafening. The silence is deafening. The images that we saw over the last weeks is horrifying. And yet, as we sit here today, we see Abraham freeing the hostage, his nephew. And that gives us hope that someday, maybe very soon, the hostages can be freed. We see an image of Abraham going and worshiping with his neighbors. And maybe one day, Israel, too, can live in peace with all of its neighbors, where its neighbors don't aim to destroy the Jewish state, but its neighbors realize that the way to live together is to live together and build together a Middle East in peace. Our Torah gives us an image that we need to work for, but our Torah also reminds us that we need to be strong, we need to support each other, and we need to remember that we're one community. In the Talmud, there's a discussion of the destruction of the Second Temple. And the answer given to why the Second Temple was destroyed was because the community expressed sinat chinam, which for the Talmud means really intercommunal disagreement and violence. Now, the Talmud was not asking everyone to be Jews the same way, because even within the rabbinic community, Hillel and Shammai disagreed about everything. The Talmud was not asking us all to agree on those things that we think of as important in Judaism. But the Talmud was asking that as we live together as a community, we realize that every part of the Jewish community is important, that every one of us is essential, and that only when we stand together can we prevail. And that also is a prayer for Israel, that Israelis and all Jews can look at each other and see our common identity and our common commitment to God, and forget for the moment our differences, forget for a moment our arguments, and instead that we need to work together in peace. We need to work together as a community, because as Ben Franklin said, which I've quoted often, we'll either all hang together or we can all hang separately. So we need to work together, we need to remember we're one community, and then hopefully soon Israel will be safe, the hostage is free, and all of us can live in peace. Shabbat Shalom.